Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Films. My name is Alan. So the men are battered and beaten down. Your many enemies gather around your lands, and food, munitions, and the will to fight any longer is running close to empty. What do you do? A glorious last stand perhaps? Or maybe a parlay, negotiate a truce, save yourself and your family, but lose your freedom? No. When faced with two terrible options, one has to be stubborn. One has to find a third way, a better way. And when facing multiple enemies, your best strategy is actually not to fight them, but turn them against each other. And in that chaos, you have another chance for survival and perhaps even victory. In the Firefly universe, there's a faction known as the Reavers. These were your typical sci-fi raiders with a more brutal and sadistic twist. They seemed completely insane and deliberately scarred and tore their own flesh, leaving gaping wounds on their body. They also had all sorts of crazy metallic piercings and seemed to have extremely high pain tolerance, which allows them to appear superhuman despite no major genetic differences from humans. These are homicidal animals, and they love cannibalism, torture, and rape. It's unclear if these individuals are even sentient because it seems impossible for normal humans to communicate with the Reavers, and every encounter with them almost always ends in bloodshed. They can, however, fly ships, so I guess they're not that stupid. In the more civilized parts of the galaxy, the Alliance is the ruling power. They are the major human faction in the galaxy. The crew of the small freighter Firefly are being hunted by the Alliance for harboring one of their super psychic soldiers, River Tam, who happened to have glanced into the minds of some of the leaders in the Alliance. Now, because of her visions, River is attracted towards a planet deep in Reaper space known only as Miranda. Not much is really known about this world. It's sort of like a legend or a myth amongst the people who live in the Alliance. When the crew arrive to Miranda, they find 30 million dead colonists and records explaining what had happened. See, the Alliance had created an experimental drug that was supposed to suppress aggression, sort of like that rage virus in 28 Days Later. They released this chemical into the atmosphere instead of doing small trials in a controlled setting for some reason, and it turned the entire population into essentially vegetables. They stopped moving, and then they just stopped eating and died. However, 0.1% of the population turned into Reapers. This was the Alliance's huge hidden secret and why they were after River. The crew of the Firefly, who were made up of generally nice people and a bunch of browncoats, the sworn enemies of the Alliance, decided to release this information to the public. They wanted to do it through their buddy, Mr. Universe. But the crew of the Firefly suspect he's been compromised by the Alliance, and so they deliberately leak a set of rendezvous coordinates to Mr. Universe, which of course makes it into Alliance hands, and they use that to set up an ambush for the Firefly. Now, the Firefly arrives as scheduled in the right place, but not before they stirred up the Hornet's Nest in Reaper space. And so instead of capturing the Firefly immediately, the Alliance fleet has to contend with a massive fleet of Reapers. The resulting chaos is ridiculous. The Reaper fleet is an equal match for the Alliance fleet, and the space around Mr. Universe's planets is suddenly full of debris and bodies. Luckily, the Firefly's main pilot, Wash, is clearly a leaf on the wind, RIP, and manages to safely land on the planet. The members of Firefly make it to Mr. Universe's backup transmitter to broadcast the Alliance's dark secret to the rest of the galaxy. The Imperium of Man was separated by a terrible gash in the fabric of time and space which ran across the entire Milky Way. It was known as the Great Rift. Those worlds were isolated from Terra on the other side of the Great Rift in an area known as the Dark Imperium. And you gotta love the naming convention in Warhammer. It's so epic. Anyway, humanity managed to build a bridge in one of the thinner areas in the Great Rift in between the planets of Vigilis and Sengua Terra, using ancient Necron pylons which had anti-warp properties to create a stable corridor from Terra to the rest of the Dark Imperium. Vigilis was originally an Imperial hive world. These are Imperial worlds with massive megacities that contained huge amounts of people. These massive pyramid-structured cities could house billions of individuals and provide the Emperor of Mankind with workers to man the factories and Imperial guardsmen to soak up Xeno offensives. Unfortunately, because of its strategic location, Vigilis would be the center point of a massive military campaign known as War of the Beast. The Imperial Guardsmen, local PDFs, and a group of Battle Sisters were already fighting against an especially nasty orc infection that had taken over much of the wasteland between the Hive cities. To make matters worse, a hidden evil erupted within the Hive cities themselves when Xeno-worshipping gene-stealer cultists launched their own rebellion from within the Hives. Their ultimate goal was to weaken the defense of the world so that their gods, the world-devouring Tyranid race, could come and take over everything. Somewhere around this time, Vigilis would be declared as a war world, which means it was an active war zone, and at the same time, it was also declared as a sentinel world. But unlike a fortress world, Vigilis lacked the preparations necessary to properly mount a defense. Luckily, this designation gave Vigilis a lot of importance, and so unlike many other worlds in the Imperium that were just swallowed by Xenos, several chapters of Space Marines would commit their forces to Vigilis and turn back the Gene-Stealer cult's assault. For a moment, there's peace on Vigilis, but this would be shattered once again when the Eldari race decide to launch a strike mission against Vanaban the Firebrand. This is a preacher in one of the Hive cities who managed to convert thousands of humans to chaos. Now, the Eldari successfully destroyed the Firebrand, which is actually really good for the Imperium in this case, but they failed to ask for permission to carry out this operation, and so they are viewed as basically enemies. And so the small Eldari force would be completely wiped out and slaughtered by Space Marines. This would infuriate various Eldari factions who would begin launching their own operations against Vigilis as well. Ultimately, all of this crazy fighting between these various factions and the Imperium Man only benefited one group, and that was Abaddon, the Despoiler, War Master of Chaos. He would arrive last to Vigilis at the head of an army of heretic Space Marines. If he is able to destroy the garrison on Vigilis, then the rest of the Dark Imperium will be cut off from Terra and the Emperor. I mean, Warhammer 40k just likes to one-up everyone with their massive scale and epicness, but there is another faction that can compete, and that of course is Star Wars. Now, we could talk about the time Rey and Finn released those Raftars on Han Solo's freighters, and that created chaos and killed all of those bandits who were looking to get money from Han Solo. But we are looking for scale, so instead we're going to be talking about one of the most impressive turn your enemies against each other moments in not only Star Wars, but in all science fiction history. And it all starts, of course, with our favorite Emperor Palpatine. Otherwise known as Darth Sidious, the last Sith in a long line of Sith working towards the grand plan to eradicate the Galactic Republic and the Jedi and all who oppose their wrinkly dark side scrotums. The plan started 1,000 years earlier at the last and 7th Battle of Ruusan, when Darth Bane tricked the remaining Sith to kill themselves in a crazy dark side ritual. For 1,000 years, the Sith would hide and gather their strength in the shadows with only one master and apprentice learning at a time. Darth Sidious and his master Darth Plagueis would basically carry out the last part of the plan. After decades of sowing discontent and chaos in the Outer Rim, a separatist movement gains political support after a series of small conflicts and blockades further erode trust in the central government. Faced with a growing separatist crisis, the Republic, for the first time since the 7th Battle of Ruusan, we mentioned earlier, reinstated a federal military force. One that was created by Darth Sidious and Darth Plagueis and secretly programmed to kill the Jedi. Darth Sidious at this point had also risen in the Republic political world as Chief Palpatine, Chancellor of the Republic. On the opposite side of the Clone Wars, you had Count Dooku, who essentially was controlled opposition because he was Palpatine's Sith apprentice, after Palpatine killed his master Darth Plagueis. The Sith controlled both sides of the war here and used the conflict to increase Darth Sidious's executive powers as the Chancellor, to the point where he eventually just took over and created the Empire. At the same time, the war would corrupt and kill many Jedi, and eventually the clone army would just carry out Order 66, a secret kill command implanted into their brains by the Sith. I mean, Darth Sidious was able to create a victory for the Sith without the rest of the galaxy and the Jedi even understanding what was happening. Brilliant. We're basically tapping into all the great sci-fi franchises of my generation right now, so let's move on to Halo. The Covenant were a coalition of assimilated alien races who were all united under some degenerate Xeno belief system. But even amongst them, infighting was not uncommon. When the Brutes joined the Covenant, they quickly began challenging the elites, who up until this point occupied most of the important and prestigious military positions in the Covenant. They were the ones who guarded the Prophet species that were the leadership caste. However, the elites' recent failures on Installation 4, thanks to the Master Chief's actions, have caused this group to fall out of favor, and the Brutes were becoming more and more aggressive been taking on many of the elite's former responsibilities, like guarding the prophets. Now, the Covenant was a very diverse group, and so one species' homeworld was not chosen as the capital. Instead, the capital was placed on a space station known as High Charity. Once the Prophet of Truth declared that the brutes were to replace the elites in the military hierarchy, the brutes started a genocide against the elites on High Charity, which also forced other species to immediately take sides. With a full-blown civil war occurring now in the Covenant homeworld, the Flood were able to take advantage of this lapse in judgment and security. The Flood infected UNSC frigate Amber Clad would appear over the station and began launching infection forms throughout the city via smaller shuttles. And because of this, neither the Brute faction or the elites would be able to retake High Charity. This is a massive setback for the Covenant, and humanity only continues to grow stronger as a result. So there you have it, guys. 4 great examples of smart commanders who are able to pit their enemies against each other and then take advantage of their combined weakness. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that life is a movie and you are the protagonist.